Hello, and nice to see you. Today we will talk about recursion, which is interesting topic in the space of ordinals and especially generative art. To explain recursion and why it is such an important matter, we have to lay some groundwork and explain how old generative collections were created. What difference does recursion make? So, old collections or inscriptions before recursion were like separate islands. So, every single inscription had no way to communicate with others. Therefore, every inscription, especially every generative inscription, had to be full code in file. That means for generative collections, HTML and JavaScript, CSS, everything had to be inscribed every single time for every artwork. There were no ways to access creative libraries like p5.js or three.js that help a lot of creators in their practice because they were simply too big to be inscribed. So the only solutions available were HTML, vanilla, that means pure JavaScript, GLSL or WebGL, or Q5. What Q5 is? Q5 is a P5 derivative that is aimed for only 2D art. First of all, there's no 3D environment and no WebGL. That doesn't simply work in Q5. However, Q5 itself is about 30 kilobytes. So that 30 kilobytes would have to be added to the artwork. To understand the meaning and the importance of these older OG collections, let's take a look at inscription costs. And of course, costs varied. Some of them were inscribed at 2-3 sats per virtual byte, but for easier estimation, let's assume it's 10 sats per virtual byte, and the prices, as you see on the presentation, are for 10 kilobytes. It's about $22. Okay, here's a moment for disclaimer. I'm presenting these prices at current Bitcoin value. Bitcoin back then was much cheaper, so you can adjust the prices to your own liking. So 10 kilobytes to inscribe, it's $22. And 10 kilobytes is usually a very convenient amount of code to create an interesting and good looking artwork. Most of my collections, I try to aim at 10 kilobytes or less. Then let's add this Q5 library to these 10 kilobytes of artwork, and we have 42 kilobytes, which costs around $100. And if we go closer to 300 kilobytes, it's $590. So now you can see how big differences are in cost of inscription. And for example, P5 min.js, so minified version of P5, which means this is the smallest file of P5. The version 1.3 from March 2021 is 600 kilobytes. The newest version of P5 is over 1000 kilobytes. So actually, inscribing tools like Unisat or Ordinals bot or I don't know, Satin.io, I assume they won't allow to inscribe such large files. The limit is about 340 or something like that, 350 kilobytes. Above that, it's impossible. Let's check how this inscribed content of these older collections look like. Let's take a look at Gleam because it's somewhere in between. It's not too compressed yet. It's just easy to read. We're using ordinals.com, official protocol browser. Here, if we scroll down, if you want to check how the inscription looks, what's the original inscription, if you will click on the content and open it in your browser, so this is it, this is the artwork, but in this HTML file, there's some extra JavaScript injected either by your browser or your plugins or ad blocks, etc., etc. So it's not as clean as it should be. So what we do, we right click and save link as on content, not on preview. Then we're downloading it, and we'll open this file in Visual Code Studio to examine it. So first, as we see, this is HTML file, typical HTML code as it looks. And first we have script. The first script we see in the head tag. So it loads first. It's the snippet, random snippet or pseudo-random number generation snippet from Generative XYZ. That's the code provided by the platform back then. It was published back then. So this is the first snippet of the code. As you can see, it's non-minified, just some tabs were cleaned maybe. And we have some styling here, some basic, very basic styling. And then we have full code of the artwork. Okay, this piece is new. This is injected by ordinals.com. That's a very new thing. It didn't happen before. However, this is the artwork. This is the whole code of the artwork. So either we check Gleam 1, Gleam 2, Gleam 5, etc. Each one of them will look the same. The same, yeah, exactly the same. Yes, that is per inscription. That provided cost, inscription cost, was cost per inscription. If we wanted to inscribe Gleam, that cost would be $22 per artwork, and we're looking only at 10 sats per virtual byte. So try to imagine what would happen if you would have a situation like there are 200 sats per virtual byte in Mempool, right? Or 300 or even 100. Then basically inscribing generative artwork stops completely because of the cost.
So that means if you have, for example, 500 pieces of artwork you want to inscribe, you have to do that before you launch it.
Yes. Well, there are like two ways of releasing collections. So one would be Scribe on demand. So how Gamma works when the collector pays the cost of inscription, and on Gamma it's fairly low. Or the other solution would be to inscribe by the artist.
And for example, the old collection, did you inscribe that before or we inscribed it?
In my case, Phantasmagoria was the only pre-inscribed collection. So I chose the seeds, I prepared the files, all 129 of them, and I inscribed all of them on my own, by myself. And all of the other collections, they were released on platforms that supported inscribe on demand mechanics. So either it was Generative XYZ, Function, and then Gamma.
Okay, thanks. And another question, the window you open after we're talking about last. What you did, you saved the file before, and then what you did with it, because I don't get the
Ah,
steps.
okay,
How you
sorry.
opened that? Is this a
Okay, so this software that I use, it's called Visual Studio Code, VSC. It's one of the most popular code editors, but you can as well use just a notepad to open the file. But in Notepad, you don't see coloring. If you have a lot of text, it's always easier to see some coloring. This is basically how old collections were created. So every single collection, separate inscription, full inscription cost was paid every single time, either by the artist or by the collector, and no knowledge, no connection between inscriptions. Then recursion comes. It introduces a new standard of on-chain communication between inscriptions. This means inscriptions can communicate, can talk to each other. They can use data from each other, which turns ordinals into a very clumsy, very hard to use, but very secure file system. And if we have a file system, then we can have access to libraries like p5.js, three.js, data compression like Flate, Broadly, etc. So this is like very, very important step that we will talk in details soon. But also, Recursion introduces endpoints within Ordinals protocol that deliver on-chain data. And what's so special about it? Because we have access to data like latest block height, latest block hash, unique stamp of latest block info, which is similar to Bitcoin RPC API. We have information about inscription itself and many, many more. So let's move to new collections, how they are created. So new collections can access libraries like p5.js or three.js. There's really good GitHub repo about all the public goods that are already inscribed. Here's the link. It's also very easy to find in Google. So this is repo prepared by Joki88, but there are many, many contributors which are OG artists, OG coders, and I'm sure you will recognize some names when we move on. For example, Lifo Fifo. So what do we find here? We find here three.js with some extensions. We find few versions of p5.js. There's Tone.js. There's even Chroma contributed by Lomechi, and many, many, many more assets that we can directly use as creative coders. So this is a great repo to use. Then we can also relate to images. So for example, I think the best known example of this is our beat blocks by Billy Resty. I'm sure you know this collection, or at least heard about it. So how images were used here, every collector who was inscribing bit blocks could provide any existing inscription, any existing JPEG or PNG inscription that affected the final artwork. So if you look on Magic Eden, you will find source inscription. One inscription is code, cursive submodules, and the second inscription is the mentioned artwork. And of course, we will see that colors correspond. I don't know the details about the codes. However, there definitely is a relation between the artwork and the inscription. So this is how Billy utilized recursion to use existing images. There are many more examples, but I think this one is the easiest to understand. And of course, there are also fonts, sounds, basically any data that is inscribed can be fetched thanks to inscription. And that led to a new way of inscribing collections, which divided code into two pieces. First, we inscribed JS code, so that was inscribed by the artist, and an executive HTML that, well, actually it depended again on the mechanics, so it was either inscribed by the artist or the collectors, depending on the mechanics. So the artist inscribes JavaScript once, either it's, I don't know, 10 kilobytes or 100 kilobytes, but one bigger file, and then HTML is inscribed multiple times, which is way smaller because it's 200 to 300 bytes. So you see the difference is huge. And let me show you how it worked on Elapsed, because this is like the newest and best example. So this is the code for Elapsed. This is the code, the JavaScript for the whole collection. And this is the piece that I inscribed. However, everyone who was sitting on function was inscribing only this small file that derived seed from the or the transaction number or the inscription ID, and then just a pointer to already inscribed JS file. So that huge code that we have here was turned into this small one. It was a huge, huge change to save on fees and save on blockchain space, which is also scarce. But that's not it. It's not only about savings, and it's not only about better storage system, but it's also about endpoints. So as I mentioned, there are many, many endpoints. You can find them in Ordinals doc documentation. Let's enter all the ordinals.com, and here you have a handbook. These are docs for the whole protocol, and here 3.5 we can find recursion, and all of the endpoints are mentioned here. There are some legacy endpoints and also some examples. These are fairly technical things, so it would be best to explain it with some examples. So let's start maybe with mycelium. So I think you know mycelium series. This is my series that I'm continuing on gamma prints, and I'm developing the algorithm, or I'm playing with the algorithm every time that something new comes up, or every time I have some kind of idea. And this is also kind of a playground for me to test new technology, new solutions that appear on chain or on gamma or just in my head. So for example, in mycelium DIY, I used block hash endpoint as a seed for pseudo randomness. That means that with every new block mined on Bitcoin, the hash changes. Let's try to take a look at mempool. Okay, it's loading really fast. So if we open any block, then we can see here that there's a hash. So this is a long number. We can also find it in the address on the top. So every block has different hash, and that hash can be used as a seed for pseudo random number generator. And this is how mycelium DIY changes. So with every new hash, we have new composition or new starting setting. Then there is mycelium DOS, the fifth entry in my art journal on blockchain. And here, block hash was used in a similar way, but also to detect new blocks and trigger a composition rearrangement. So when like block hash change was monitored in some intervals, and when new hash arrived that was different than previous one, so which means there is a new block, there was a composition, there was a like celebratory sequence triggered that happened for some time. Then there is elapsed. Elapsed uses another endpoint, which is block time. Block time provides us the time of the last mined block. Basically, it says that this block was mined like this day, this hour, etc., etc., etc. So elapsed is calculating how much time elapsed since the last mined block. Since the artwork has two personalities, one is mercurial and another is saturnine, it either goes super excited, super dynamic, and it speeds up, or it goes introspective and slows down, waiting for the next block to come. When the next block comes, the speed comes back to normal, and then again the countdown or the count up starts again. And the newest one that was just published today, it's mycelium 45, and it uses block info. So block info is one of the most complex endpoints on ordinals, and it provides information about last block. Let's take a look because this is kind of interesting. Here we have block info. So it can provide block info for any block that we ask it to. And there are many details about what happened to the block. There's like timestamps, so when the block was mined, there are average fees, average fee rates, hash of the block, max fee, etc., etc. There's a lot of details that are super nice and can be used to create dynamic artworks. And in my Celioid 45, I use average fee rate of most recent block to change the size of the deflector that is in the middle. I need to show it on on the video because still have very low fees, so that's impossible to test. So this is a sample of 4 sats fees. You can see there is a very tiny action of the deflector in the center of the image. There are some path changes, but it's not very visible. It's affecting not a lot of particles in not a big area. However, if we move to higher fees, then we have, this is the example at 134 sats, and now you see that the deflector is much bigger, the area grows. Okay, so we'll move on because I think the next example will be really cool. So here's the collection by Life50. I don't know if you have heard about Spellbound. It's one of the most interesting collections, one of the most interesting ideas actually that I've seen in using the endpoint that basically makes the inscription self-aware. So let's open this because there will be a lot shown here on Magic Eden that will see what the thing is all about. If you take a look here, these artworks are derived straight from Wizards of Ord. Some of them are straightforward, easy to spot. These are Wizards of Ord, that's easy, but where do these blue screens of death come from? Because this is not an error by Magic Eden, this is an action that was taken, it's designed by Life50. Here it goes. So basically, Spellbound is a collection that was airdropped to Wizards of Ord holders, if I'm correct, and every holder of Wizards of Ord got a Spellbound that used the ordinal that they had. Here you won't find it as cursive modules because this is designed in a bit different way. However, trust me, I investigated the code and it's all there. And what happens? If you sell your Wizards of Ord or Spellbound separately, it breaks the Spellbound. They have to be sold together or transferred together to create the proper inscription. Otherwise, you will get this blue screen of death and the art of Spellbound just won't show. So the inscription tracks itself how it was sent, or was it sent with a corresponding Wizard of Ord. If not, there you go, blue screen of death. And finally, we're talking about all these endpoints, about all these things that are possible with recursion, and how recursion creates awesome art that is connected with blockchain, that reacts to blockchain, etc., etc. So how come Memflux, that is an old collection or OG collection that happened before recursion, claims to use data directly from Bitcoin? Because it does. There's no exaggeration. So at the time, many creators were experimenting with various solutions, how to reach that data, how to utilize it. And well, one of them was me, of course. And if I'm trying to access the data, it usually needs to have some kind of source, right? So what's the source of data on Bitcoin? That's obviously the node. So Memflux uses BTC RPC API to fetch some data. Some details will be in a minute. But for example, how it affects the artwork. So the number of transactions in the mempool are the number of lights. Blur strength grows with the size of the blockchain. It's a very long-term effect, so it will grow for days, months. I'm really interested how it's going to look like, I don't know, like 50 years. Maybe it will just become a blurry one color, or it will become something similar to race. I don't know it yet because I don't know how big Bitcoin blockchain can grow. So difficulty affects size of the lights, and total fees affect the movement speed. So that's very short time. It can change from block to block. Memflux uses Bitcoin Node RPC API and has like two modules. First module is a simple generative artwork that you will see, and there's additional module that is Bitcoin reactive, and that is released when you press B. To access the node, there are hard-coded public node links. However, if you don't trust the hard-coded node links, or they die, because that is also possible, there's also an option to switch to any kind of node or input your own address, so the artwork can live forever. It's worth mentioning that Memflux was created in time when sandboxing wasn't as strong as today, because currently everything that goes out from Ordinals protocol is forbidden and inscriptions should relate with each other. We'll take a look on one inscription. So if we go to ordinals.com/inscription and paste this and refresh, we see that there's an animation. And if we click B, so we'll see a short log that BTC is on, but bam, then we go. So here we go, and the artwork breaks, etc., etc. So we will use the same trick with content. So right click, save link as, and we'll save the link. But this time we will open this file in the browser. Here's the issue that it can't fetch properly the inscription number. However, if we turn on the Bitcoin node, we can see that it starts reacting to current blockchain situation, current mempool situation. Very low fees. Yeah, so if the fees are so low, we won't see not many lights, everything will be slow. Okay, so thank you very much. That's all that I prepared for today. I hope, even though we had some technical issues, there was some interesting info about recursion and why it is important for the Ordinals ecosystem, especially generative art. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in voice or maybe.
So I have a question. So I don't know if I understand it right, but does it mean that you use that because someone inscribed something, a code or a technique, and you want to use that technique without using more kilobytes, and you use Recursion to keep the file size small and to work with something which already coded? I don't understand like what's the pro to use the recursion from inscription someone inscribed like let's say 1 year before.
Oh, so you're referring to the part like, for example, bit blocks and using those images, for example, this?
I thought that recursion is helping in the tag and file size.
Yes, that's
Like
true.
if you're using it, like it's easier for you to work
Yes, yes, that is true. Yeah.
when you use recursion.
When I use recursion. So I use recursion usually as I have shown with elapsed. So I inscribed my script separately. This is JavaScript inscribed separately. So this is one inscription that let's call inscription 0, right? And then we have 100 artworks, and each artwork is only this small file that I don't have to inscribe full JavaScript code every single time, but rather this small tiny file. So this is one way to use recursion. There are multiple ways to use recursion.
So that means you have, say, one inscription. You are like putting all that code and all that things in, and then all other artworks you create, you use always the first one you inscribe. Like,
Yes, yes,
is it
that is
like
true.
how it's working? Like you have one, like a mother, like that parent-child. Is that parent-child thing?
No, no, parent-child is something different.
Okay. But is it like I said? Yeah. So you have one which you put all your code in, and then you use other ones and like connected to the first one.
Yes, 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 exactly.
Because that helps you to inscribe with less files. So that's the main case.
It helps to reduce the fees, that's one way, but also some things are impossible to be done without recursion. And I don't know if you have seen this drop, Libertas, that maybe will explain it better. I don't know how exactly it was done because I didn't investigate the code, but I have some idea. So we can look, for example, at just any artwork, and we see that there are some things like these flowers on the head, this robe, the key, and the letters HODL, right? There's a recursive submodule here that is probably the code. So let's investigate this one. And it looks like the code because it's broken. But then if we look at what is in this wallet, then we will see that we have the HODL, we have some eyes, we have, oh, here's another key, Oh, here's the golden key, right? There's not every single element, but there are some elements. So here's the inscription that you collect that looks nice and everything, but there are also inscriptions that are just elements of this inscription. So this artwork is layered. So there is a layer of the painting, there is the layer of some attributes that are added on top of it, and it's very useful to create generative PFPs that can randomize and look for some features and add them, like stack them on each other, right? I don't know if that helps.
So it's like samples which are online and everyone can use it.
Yes, pretty much, yes. Okay, technically everyone can use it. Legally, I think that wouldn't be fully legal to just use them because they're online.
So now I understand the art for people job. It is like different recursion and putting all in one, right?
Thank you very much. Yes, that's the example I should have mentioned. Yes, art for the people. This is like the ultra example of recursion, how it worked. Here we can easily see which inscriptions were used, and then we can relate to how they were placed. Yes, art for the people is the greatest example of how you can use resources that are currently on chain.
And other good thing is that numbers will keep small or looking like it's small because it has always the minus in the collection, right? So I guess we have more numbers on the plus side than on the minus side. So that's maybe other case why a lot of artists use that to like the inscription number aside, which are not so much used from everyone because for like a normal person like me, if I want to inscribe something, I inscribe it the normal way. But for an artist, they know how to inscribe like recursion, and so is that also a good thing? Like why you use that because it's of the small numbers.
But small numbers of what?
Like, do we have the same? Like, for example, we have now 70 million inscriptions, or I don't know, like let's say 70 million.
Yeah.
The recursion is going from -1, the first one started at -1, right?
Oh, no, 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 no.
And
That's cursed
go up.
inscriptions.
That's something different.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
something different. These are cursed inscriptions, and they were cursed inscriptions is something else. They were, I don't want to say bug, but an unexpected behavior in the code that in some cases created cursed inscription which had like negative number. But that has been already fixed, so we won't see any negative numbers anymore.
Okay, because I was always thinking that's the same thing, like recursion and these negative numbers.
No, 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 no.
Oh, thanks.
No problem. Yeah, the nomenclature, the naming ordinals on Bitcoin, it can be very confusing. I know when I was looking into runes, all that etching, cenotaphs, and all that stuff were so confusing at the beginning until I figured it out. Yeah.
So you said there will be no minus numbers anymore, but you can use already inscribed first inscription and you can do recursion to the minus inscription. That's possible. But you can't put new minus inscription on
Yes.
chain.
Yes, new inscriptions that would be made the same way the cursed inscription were made got a new name. Oh, they are called vindicated. They are just numbered as any other inscription. They get a positive number, so all the negative numbers that are there will stay there, but there will be no new negative numbers.
Thanks. That's really interesting. And also for collecting point, very interesting in my opinion, because that's something like a mistake in a very, I would say, perfect technical, I don't know, space. So that's really interesting for a collector as well, for art collector or historical collector.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Cursed inscriptions, they are very rare because I think there are like few hundred thousand, so like 500,000 of cursed inscriptions or something like this. And it's impossible to create any new ones. So the one that are there, and there will be no new. So there are definitely scarce, absolutely. As a concluding thought is that there are many OG collections that are valued highly because they are OG, because they are early, right? And it was really wonderful days of early art on ordinals and experimenting and discovering all the possibilities and developing and learning about all the new changes and everything. It was magical, like truly magical how the wizards describe it. So yeah, that was magical time. However, there is absolutely a lot more to come also to Bitcoin and to ordinals. And with this presentation, I wanted to give you some knowledge, some tools maybe to look for the interesting and valuable and maybe groundbreaking original projects.
That was very interesting for me. I learned a lot of things didn't know before. And the last question from my side: when the meme pool stops, does it mean that the movement of Glam or Memflux stops too? Because there's nothing happening. Like because you said these are addicted to fees, how many transactions is happening. So if this meme block stops, that means artwork will not move anymore.
There's a very simple answer to this question. Let's just take a look at, at the incoming block, the next block that will be mined that we see here. And every now and then we'll see some rearrangement because there are new transactions coming. Some transactions are pushed back because someone posts transaction with higher fees, etc. So the mempool doesn't stop. The mempool doesn't sleep. It works all the time and it's looking like for the best. Well, I don't know the best. The solution that is within Bitcoin protocol, right? But the blocks might stop, but the mempool doesn't stop. I mean, blocks might stop for a while, right? For a moment. They can be like here now we see the block is 21 minutes ago. Block should be every 10 minutes approximately. So it's delayed, but eventually it will move on. But this causes the transaction are still moving, coming, going, being rearranged. Thank you very much for coming today. Bye bye.